Hi everybody, this is a second graders review of the Great Expectation. Okay, so here Mrs. Joe has been out a dozen times looking for you, Pip, and she's out now making it a baker's dozen. So Mr. Joe is explaining to Pip what happens. So Mrs. Joe is now out. She's been out dozen times, 12 times looking for Pip, and she's out now again, so making a baker's dozen. Baker's dozen does 13 times. Mrs. Joe is outside 13 times looking for you, Mr. Joe said. Is she? Pip asked. Yes, Pip, said Joe. And what's worse, she's got a tickler with her. So Mr. Joe explains that Mrs. Joe Gargery is carrying a tickler. Tickler basically is a stick to hit Pip. So at this dismal intelligence, I twisted only button on my waistcoat round and round, and looked in great depression at the fire. So at this dismal means unpleasant. At this dismal intelligence, unpleasant information that now Pip knows that Mrs. Joe Garger is went outside 13 times carrying a tickler. And I twisted the only button on my waistcoat round and round. So I guess Pip now feels quite nervous and anxious. Find out that Mrs. Joe is really angry. So Pip turns his button and looked in great depression at the fire. So they have a fire in the chimney, in the wall, right? So Pip just looked at the fire on the wall quite nervously. Right? And tickler was a wax-ended piece of cane. So cane is a stick, okay? And it has a wax at the end, at the tip of the cane. There's a wax, and worn smooth by collision with my tickled frame. So it became the tip of the cane became quite smooth because Mrs. Joe Gargery hit Pip so many times with this. So because of Pip's frame, because of Pip's body, the wax became quite smooth. She sat down, said Joe, and she got up, and she made a grab at Tickler, and she rampaged out. So Mr. Joe said, no, Mrs. Joe will sit down, and she got up again, and she made a grab at Tickler. She was really angry, so she grabbed a Tickler, and she went outside, and she rampaged out. Rampage means very angry and mad. That's what she did, Pip, said Joe, slowly clearing the fire between the lower bar with the poker and looking at it. So poker is also a stick. I guess Mr. Joe, he was sitting by the fire in the chimney. He's sitting by a fire and he is holding a poker. And using a poker, he is like making the fire, right? So clearing the fire between the lower bar. You need a bar, you need a wood to set the fire, right? This is a bar made of wood. So Mr. Joe is moving around this bar in the fire, making more fires. Right? and looking at it, she rampaged out Pip, and he repeated, Mr. Joe repeated, the Mrs. Joe rampaged out. She became really angry and went outside. Looking for you, Pip. Has she been gone long, Joe? I always treated him as a larger species of child and as no more than my equal. So, is Mrs. Joe outside for a long time? Asked Pip. And Pip always treated Mr. Joe as a larger species of a child. So Mr. Joe might be a adult and he is a strong man, but inside his mentality is a child. So Pip treated Mr. Joe as a child and no more than my equal. So Pip treated him as his equal friend rather than an adult. Well, said Joe, glancing up at the Dutch clock, she's been on the rampage this last spell, about 5 minutes. So for this last moment, last time, she was really mad, angry, and she's on the rampage about last 5 minutes. She is a coming. Get behind the door, old chap, and have the jack towel between you. So Mr. Joe said, oh, she's coming. My wife is coming. Get behind the door, old chap. Old chap is a nickname. Okay? Mr. Joe is calling Pip as an old chap nickname. And have a jack towel between you. So couple of the student asked him the question of the meaning of betwixt. So betwixt means between. Put some towels between you. Okay? Put some jack towels. I took the advice. So Pip took the advice of Mr. Joe, and my sister, Mrs. Joe, throwing the door wide open and finding an obstruction behind it, immediately divined the cause. So Mrs. Joe came in, opened the door, and she found Pip behind the door, and she divined the cause. So some of you also asked me the meaning of divined. The cause means divined here means she asked the cause. Question. She asked me, where are you? No, I was looking for you. Okay, she divined the cause and applied tickler to its further investigation. So, to its further investigation. Some of you also asked me the meaning of the further investigation. Means she asked more questions. To Pips. So she keep on asking questions and hit Pip. So she concluded by throwing me. I open serve as a connubial missiles at Joe, who glad to get hold of me on my own any terms, passed me into a chimney and quietly fenced me up there with his great leg. So Mrs. Joe finally she threw Pip. So I often serve as a connubial missiles. So connubial means of marriage, or it means that between husband and wife. So Pip was like a missile between husband and wife. Pip served as a connubial missile. So she threw Pip to Joe, and Joe receives Pip. And it happens quite often times. I often serve as a missile. So it happens often times. So Joe is glad to hold of me. Joe is glad to hold Pip on any terms, on any time. Anytime Mrs. Joe Gargery threw Pip to Mr. Joe, he is glad to receive Pip, okay, and pass me on into the chimney. So Mr. Joe put Pip into a chimney and quietly fenced me up there with his great leg. So now Mr. Joe tried to stop Mrs. Joe hitting Pip. So Mr. Joe is blocking Pip with his leg. Where have you been, you young monkey? Said Mrs. Joe, stamping her foot. So she's like stamping her. So she's quite mad. So she's like hitting the ground with her leg, moving up and down. Okay, stamping. I don't know if it explains or not, but this is what stamping means. Stamping her foot. Where have you been? Tell me. Tell me directly what you've been doing to wear me away with fret and fright and worry. Or I'd have you out the corner if you was 50 pip and he was 500 gargeries. So she's telling, Mrs. Joe is telling Pip, tell me directly where you have been doing and you wear me out, wear me away. Wear me away means make her worried. Okay, you really make Mrs. Joe Gargery worried. And fret, fret, fright, and worry, all the same meaning. Okay, you make me really worried about you. Worried. If you don't tell me directly where we have been, I have you out of that corner. So I will throw you away. I'm going to throw you away if I have 50 pips. And I really want to throw away Mr. Joe Gargery if I have a 500 Gargeries. So she really hates both of them, and it seems that Mrs. Joe Gargery hates Mr. Joe more because she wishes she had a 500 Gargeries so she can throw him 500 times. But she only wants to throw Pip only 50 times, which means that she hates Mr. Joe Gargery more. And I have only been to a churchyard, said I from my stool. So Pip answered, oh, I've been only to a churchyard, crying and rubbing myself. Pip's crying. Churchyard? Repeated my sister. If it weren't for me, you'd been to the churchyard long ago and stayed there. Who brought you up by hand? So Mrs. Joe Gargery is saying, if I hadn't taken care of you, if I hadn't raised you, you'd probably you probably dead and buried in the churchyard long time ago. If I hadn't taken care of you, if I hadn't brought you up with my hand. So who brought you up by hand? No, no, I brought you up, Pip, and you've totally forgot about my work, and you're talking about going to church, huh? How dare you? She is so mad and angry. She is quite a mean person. She is very mean to Pip. You did, said I. So, Mrs. Joe Gargery asked her, who brought you up by hand? And Pip answered, you did. You bring me up by hand. And why did I do it? I should like to know, exclaimed the sister. So she shouted, why? Why did I bring you up? I mean, she is saying that she didn't want to do that. No, she is regretting why she had to raise up Pip, even though Pip is not even a son. I whimpered, and I don't know, answered. Whimper means I cried. I cried and answered, I don't know. I don't, said my sister. I don't know it either. I'd never do it again. I would never raise you again. No, I know that. I may truly say I've never had this apron off mine off since born you are. So ever since you were born, Pip, ever since you were born, I'd never take off my apron. Why? Why did she never take off her apron? It means that she was working all the time. Right? It's bad enough to be a blacksmith's wife and him a gardery without being your mother. So she is complaining. It's already bad enough for me of being a blacksmith's wife without even being your mother. And now your mother and I'm a wife of blacksmith. It's really terrible, is what she is saying. My thought strayed from the question as I looked disconsolately at the fire. So Pip was looking at the fire, like, not paying attention, disconsolately, unconsciously. Pip is not paying attention what Mrs. Joe is saying. He just end up watching the fire in the wall. The reason is because he just didn't listen to Mrs. Joe. He just looked at fire because the fugitive out on the marshes with the iron leg. So the fugitive refers to that strange man, refers to the man Pip met in the marshes. So Pip thought about the man with the iron leg and the mysterious young man. This guy, he lied that there's another mysterious young man hiding behind, right? So Pip also believed it, and he thought about this mysterious young man, and Pip thought about the file, the food. Pip has to find the file and food and bring it to this man tomorrow morning. And the dreadful pledge I was under to commit a larceny on those sheltering premises rose before me in the avenging coals. And also those terrible promise, dreadful pledge, terrible promise. Pip made a promise with this man to bring a file and riddles, right? So I was under to commit. So Pip have to make this. Pip has to keep this promise. So Pip is under the pledge to commit. He has to keep this promise and a larceny on those sheltering premises. So larceny, stealing. Pip has to steal a bread. Pip has to steal a file to bring them to this man from Mrs. Joe Gardner's kitchen. So Pip has to commit a larceny. Pip has to stealing on those sheltering premises. So sheltering premise is Pip's house. This is a shelter, right? And Mr. Joe and Mrs. Joe Gargery is taking care of Pip. Now he has to do stealing in this house. And these kind of thinking, opinions, ideas, it all rose before me. Inside Pip's head, these kind of thinking was going on. And in the avenging coals and glowing. In the chimney, in the fire, the coal is firing, glowing red. In this glowing coal, while Pip was looking at the coal, all kind of these ideas just came in Pip's head. And ha! Said Mrs. Joe, restoring Tickler to his station. So Mrs. Joe put it back on the position. And she said, Churchyard indeed. You may well say churchyard, you too. So yes, you can talk about churchyard. One of us, by the by, had not said it at all. So one of us refers to Joe and Mr. Joe. I mean, one of us refers to Pip and Mr. Joe. So one of us, by the by side, had not said it at all. We didn't say anything. While Mrs. Joe is angry and she's talking a lot, complaining a lot, Pip and Mr. Joe is not saying anything. You will drive me to church between you. So one of you, either Pip or Mr. Joe, between you guys, Pip and Mr. Joe, one day, one of these days, you will drive me to church. You will kill me one of these days. And oh, a precious pair you'd be without me. Oh, okay, you guys like each other, so you will make a really a precious pair, precious couple without me if I die. She's kind of getting jealous between Pip and Mr. Joe. As she applied herself to set the tea things, Joe peeped down me over his leg, as if he were mentally casting me in and himself up and calculating what kind of pair we practically should make under the grievous circumstances foreshadowed. So, it's quite strange. While Mrs. Joe, she is complaining a lot about her life, complaining a lot about Pip and Mr. Joe, she still prepared for tea things. She still prepared for tea for Mr. Joe and Pip. So, meanwhile, while she's preparing for tea, Joe peeped down at me over his leg. Mr. Joe looked at Pip, okay? And as if he were mentally casting me. So Pip is hiding, right? Pip is hiding in the chimney. So, Joe is not actually holding him, but Joe is thinking about mentally, thinking about casting me. So casting means holding. So Mr. Joe was thinking about mentally holding Pip up. Okay. So Mr. Joe wants to hold Pip up from the fire. Okay, he is thinking about it and calculating what kind of pair we practically should make under the grievous circumstances foreshadowed. So under these sad circumstances, the sad and gloomy circumstances, Mr. Joe seems to think about what kind of pair Pip and Joe would make, really, if Mrs. Joe is gone. And after that, he sat feeling his right side flaxen curls and whisker, and following Mrs. Joe about his blue eyes, as his manner always was squally times. Squally times, stormy times. This is really stormy times. Mrs. Joe is shouting and she's angry, she's complaining and she's scolding Pip. And in these stormy times, Mr. Joe, usually what he was doing is he's touching his right side flaxen. He's touching his hair and he's touching his whisker and he just looks at the Mrs. Joe without saying anything in this stormy times. And my sister had a transient way of cutting our bread and butter for us that never varied. So she really has a consistent or habitual. So Mrs. Joe Gargery has habitual way of cutting our bread and butter for us that never varied, never changes. She cut the bread and butter same way all the time. First, with her left hand, she jammed the loaf hard, and this is a bread, right? So she jammed it. She hold it with her left hand, right? Jam, hold. She hold a loaf. This is a loaf. Hard and fast against her bib. So she is always wearing a bib, right? And she hold the bread hard, where it sometimes got a pin into it. So in the bib there is always pin and sometimes a needle. So she put bread so close to her own bib. So those bib from a pin and or needle go into the bread accidentally, right? Which we afterward got into our mouth. So those pin or needle, it goes into the mouth of Pip or Mr. Joe, so accidentally. So they had to pull that pin, needle or pin out of the bread. Then she took some butter on a knife and spread it on the loaf. So with a knife, she put some bread, she put some butter and put it on the bread. Spread it on the loaf in an apothecary kind of way. So apothecary is the place where you make a medicine, right? So when you make a medicine, since medicine is a chemical, you have to be really careful, accurate, right? So you are using a scale, right? So you are using a scale in apothecary and use the medicine, make a medicine. So apothecary kind of way means very accurately. So she spread the butter very accurately as if she were making a plaister. So using both sides of the knife with a slapping dexterity. So dexterity is skill. Just like she's slapping the bread, she plastered the butter on the bread and trimming and molding the butter off around the crust. So, she actually cut only the piece of the bread, right? Only the one piece of bread, and she eventually trim and molding the butter off round the crust. So in this round crust part, she put the butter in this part, okay, in this round part. Then she gave the knife a final smart wipe on the edge of the plaster. So after she put all the jams on the bread, finally, with a knife, she put the final smart butter wipe on the edge. So finally, she put the butter at the edge, finally. Final touch, final wiping. Which she finally, before separating from the loaf, hewed into two halves. And hew means cut, right? She cut the piece into a half, right? Cut it into half. And Joe got one, and I the other. Okay. So even though Mrs. Joe Gargery really complains a lot, she still prepares tea things, and she prepared a bread for Joe and Pip, and she gave it for both of these people. Okay, so we'll stop here. Okay, we'll continue our lesson next time. Okay, thank you, everyone. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.